So, so if you don't mind getting another share screen for the day or for the week, I'm going to share my screen and hope not to bore you. Here it goes. So, hope-based hope-based narratives. What do I mean by narratives? What is it really? Is it stories? Is it communications or communications only? Why narratives? I think I will try and get at the meaning of narratives through different ways. The first way is by talking about the importance of narratives, and maybe I'll try to explain later how exactly I define it. And I'll start by quoting Yuval Harari, who some of you may know, some of his books you may have read. And in one of the things he wrote, he said that the real difference between us human beings and chimpanzees is this mysterious glue that enables millions of humans to cooperate effectively, regardless of how far apart we are geographically. Imagine someone from the Congo being being behaving in society almost with the same kind of rules or expectations as someone from another part of the world. What is it that binds us together and makes us one species? According to him, that mysterious glue is not our genes. It's our ability to tell stories, myths even, and believe in them as one species, as one nation, or as one community. He said that we cooperate effectively with strangers because we believe in things like gods, nations, money, and human rights. Yet none of these things exist outside the stories that we tell one another, that we invent and tell one another and believe in. Now, I'm not going to debate with you whether God actually exists or human rights is just a narrative that we concocted, but the point by Yuval Harari is clear that narratives are the foundations really of the human society. We move in this world, we create institutions, we destroy them and build new ones back, or we say no to them based on the stories that we think are common sense and are part of our fiber as a community or as individuals. So to me, narratives, if you take away all the technical definitions, are really the stories that we tell ourselves, our societies that we believe in and that guide our behavior and our expectations of ourselves and of others. And which means to me that the work that we do in social change is really about telling, creating, and convincing others about narratives. We exist in societies that have narratives. A lot of those narratives we believe are unfair or unjust or discriminatory to some groups or some individuals, and we want to change them. And we change them through the work that we do. But in fact, what we do is to change, invent, and propagate narratives. Now, the challenge that I realized based on my own work and all the mistakes I've seen myself make and my colleagues make, and I still continue to make at times, is that we don't always tell the most effective narratives because we're wired a certain way in the social change field. And a dear friend of mine, his name is Thomas Coombs. He used to be head of brand at Amnesty International in London. So his job, his jam is human rights communications. And what he did at some point a few years ago is to take a step back, take a sort of sabbatical, and really re-examine the work he was doing, what he was doing right and what he was doing wrong. So he looked at different cause campaigns in the US and other parts of the world. And what he came back with was a realization that a lot of the work he was doing was just, well, plain wrong. They weren't based in how the human brain is wired and how human emotions work. And that's when he came to this thing called hope-based communications. And I'll get into the 5 shifts within hope-based communications, but I want to start with this image. So I'm from the Philippines, born and raised there. I started my work there. And this is an image from my country. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the situation there, but we have this president named Rodrigo Duterte. He's the one who's been waging I think it's fair to say, and he will be proud himself to say that he's been waging this war against drug addicts, and basically there's this drug war where anyone who is suspected of not even trafficking but possessing drugs can be killed the next day without trial, but by different elements of the government and outside. So this is a protest against Duterte, a very typical human rights driven protest where in the middle, if the image is not so clear, you will see Duterte depicted as the devil. And under the devil is named Monsterte, as if, Duterte the monster. Now, this is, as you may know, especially for those of you who've been in this gig for decades, you would know that this is a very typical tactic in human rights advocacy, which is naming and shaming, right? The expectation or the way it has always worked is you name the violation or the bad behavior, and by shaming them, they will change the way they work. And this is what protests with effigies like this, how they work. But the problem in this day and age that we have, especially in this day and age of populists, is that how do you name and shame politicians with no shame? That is the $1 million question. And a lot of the work that we do that is based on naming and shaming are even backfiring because they take the words that we use to our disadvantage. And by saying or condemning what they do, we are in fact helping to provide more airtime for their statements and their views. So, what are the 5 shifts in hope based communications? There is a website and an actual guide that you can go to. If you just Google hope based communications, you'll get there. And there are more examples there. But I'm going to walk through the 5 steps or the 5 shifts, like a self help book for self improvement. And see how this makes sense to you and to the work that you do. Please feel free to I can't see you all now because I see my screen, unfortunately, but just say something in the chat or raise your hand, and Gigi and Sarah will let me know to stop and take your questions. So let's start with the first shift. The first shift is moving from using fear as your overarching emotion or the basis of your narrative to one that is based in hope. And I will use the human brain to illustrate why this shift is necessary. Here in the simplified version of the human brain, you see 2 parts: the old and lower survival part of the brain, and the upstairs or higher evolved part of the brain. So the way things work is that when you show images or use words that make people fearful or sad or anxious, you are actually activating that downstairs survival part of the brain. That's the amygdala or the fight or flight center of the brain. And when you do that, you make people fearful and you make them activate that part of the brain that makes them preserve themselves. They clam up, they close up, and instead of practicing openness and kindness and empathy, the focus of the person becomes about self-preservation. But when you show images or conjure an image or an idea that makes people feel hopeful, like with images or ideas about abundance or confidence in the future or joy even, you actually trigger the upstairs, more evolved, calmer part of the brain that then allows the person to respond with openness and even generosity, and allows that person to practice empathy. Now, this simple neuroscience insight really means a lot for the work that we do, not only as communicators, but as strategists, because you know how often in human rights or development aid reports, the front page or the image of the cover of our reports are starving children in Africa with a fly in the eye, and of war and people dying, because we want to make people aware of the problem. But the problem with that is we are in fact triggering the downstairs survival part of the brain, and we are producing a reaction that is opposite to the reaction that we want. I'm going to give now, for our first film of the afternoon, an example from 1980s Chile. We know that in the 70s and 80s, there was a spate of military dictatorships across Latin America, including in Chile. And Chile had this gentleman named General Augusto Pinochet, who at that time had been ruling Chile for 15 brutal years, and thousands of Chileans were disappeared, injured, and many were sent fleeing the country. But because of international pressure, Pinochet we basically had to hold a national plebiscite in 1988, where people would vote either yes to keeping him in power or no to keeping him in power, and then a national election would have to be held to choose someone who will lead Chile. So I will show you the trailer of a movie, of course with its own dramatizations, but it tells you about the kind of narrative or framing that they used to convince people to vote no to Pinochet. Instead of invoking images of his abuses, they instead did not talk about them, but tried to paint a picture of a future Chile that is happy if without Pinochet. I'm going to skip this one. There you go.
¿Es todo?
Sí, ¿no?
Creo que esto no vende.
El presidente va a ganar igual, dejémonos de hueva.
¿Dónde están los presos políticos?
Basta, hay que ser más creativos, carajo. Hay que darle la vuelta a esto.
A mí la democracia me parece entretenida.
Producto alegre, si tú lo planteas así.
Estamos utilizando un lenguaje publicitario, pero armando un concepto político detrás.
Porque sin la dictadura la alegría va a llegar. Vamos a decir que no.
¿Qué chucha hace un mimo en medio de mi película?
La oportunidad que tenemos de derrocar a la dictadura.
Esa fue un suicidio, lógico que quieran ganar, pero no pueden, ¿cierto? Veo problemas.
Chile, la alegría ya viene.
Now I'm going to show you the actual song, which is Chile, la alegría ya viene, which means Chile, happiness is coming. And please pay close attention to the choice of images and the words. The translation isn't perfect, but it will give you a sense of the kind of narrative that they tried to paint in this campaign.
Lo que diga, yo soy libre de pensar, porque siento que es la hora de ganar la libertad. Hasta cuando ya de abusos es el tiempo de cambiar, porque basta de miseria, voy a decir que no.
Porque nace el arco iris después de la tempestad. Porque quiero que florezcan mis maneras de pensar. Porque sin la dictadura la alegría va a llegar. Porque pienso en el futuro, voy a decir que no. Vamos a decir que no. Oh.
Con la fuerza de mi voz.
Vamos a decir que no. Oh. Yo lo canto sin temor. Vamos a decir que no. Oh.
Todos juntos a triunfar.
Vamos a decir que no. Por la vida y por la paz.
Terminemos con la muerte, es la oportunidad
de vencer a la violencia con las armas de la paz.
Porque creo que mi patria necesita dignidad por el Chile para todos. Vamos a decir que no, vamos a decir que no, oh, con la fuerza de mi voz. Vamos a decir que no, oh, yo lo canto sin temor. Vamos a decir que no, oh, todos juntos a triunfar. Vamos a decir que no, por la vida y por la paz. Vamos a decir que no, Chile, la alegría ya viene. Chile, la alegría ya viene. Chile, la alegría ya viene.
So for those of you who are familiar with Chile, have been to Chile, know of Chileans, or are married to them, like people still know that song. They still sing that song. They know the lyrics. In the recent upheavals in Chile, of course, people are asking what happened to the happiness that we were promised post-Pinochet. That's another story for another day. But the strategy here, the narrative is, instead of engaging in the same framing about peace and security and bringing stability through a dictatorship, they tried to paint a very powerful alternative that people can opt for and be part of. That is the first shift in hope-based communications, because they knew that they were going to lose if they made people fearful, even if they made people fearful of Pinochet. Because once that part of the brain is triggered, the decisions that human beings make become entirely different than when the upstairs part of the brain is triggered. But it doesn't mean that hope-based communications is about all showing only happy images. I always get asked this question like, but Chris, I work in conflict. I work on poverty. I can't be showing people who are all happy and getting good food and there's peace when there's actual conflict. And I'm like, oh, please don't show happy kids if you're trying to cover a certain very sensitive issue, because hope-based communications, or any effective communications, is about your ability to be sensitive to the context and really knowing the context and knowing what is crass and what is actually powerful. What hope-based communications is about is being intentional about your narrative so that the people you are trying to reach don't feel a sense of despair or that there is no way out. So you can be showing images that are sad. You can be showing images that make people feel very reflective or introspective instead of jumping in joy. But at the end of the day, the feeling that they leave with is a feeling that there may be a problem now, there's a big conflict, but there is a way out, and that there is something I can do about it. That is the definition of hope. Hope is not some empty feeling of joy and ignorance about the woes of the world. It's about a feeling that there's something that can be changed to make it better. That's the first shift. Now, the second shift is, this is something I'm very well trained in as a human rights lawyer, knowing what you're against. But the problem is that we often spend 90, 80, or sometimes all of our time talking about what we're against instead of really articulating what we are for. And I'm going to use some examples. This is an example from the journalism world. You may be familiar with the woman on the second to the rightmost. That's Maria Ressa. She's from the Philippines, and she's one of this year's recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. She's been criminalized for her valiant work in journalism in the Philippines, and she is here as I think keynoting a global congress of investigative journalists a couple of years back. And the tagline of the whole congress was that truly journalism is not a crime. It's true. And we know that a lot of journalists are being criminalized and are being killed for their important work. So this statement is true. But the problem with this statement, again, goes back to how the human brain works. And I'm going to show you exactly how this sentence is processed normally by the human brain. So the brain will retain the word journalism, it will retain the word crime. But what the brain will not necessarily retain are the words is not a. So imagine you're saying the statement to someone who's not steeped in the issues. They didn't even know that journalists and journalism are tied to crime. But what you've done by saying that is you've left two concepts in the brain of your reader or your audience. Journalism is crime journalism is a crime, journalism and criminals are the same. You've left two concepts and left for that brain and that human being with their biases and cultural backgrounds and all other baggages that are deeply personal to make their own associations between two concepts that in fact you're trying not to associate with one another. So instead of just saying what something is not or what something you are against is, can you speak equally or perhaps with greater airtime about what you are for? What does it mean for society to have vibrant journalism? What does it mean for society to have a space where people can really speak their mind and not be treated as criminals for doing so? Can you tell us about a society with more journalism than less journalism? And one of the people I work with is named Laura Liguri. She's a neuroscientist, fantastic neuroscientist and human being. And she published this blog in Open Global Rights that summarizes some of the findings that she wants to put out there for social change actors. And what she's saying is that based on all the research, and there's so much research that we can use using cognitive psychology and neuroscience, is that when we speak a lot about human rights abuses or things like poverty, etc., and focus our communications and our narratives only on the abuses, we in fact end up inadvertently helping to perpetuate them. Now, that is a scandalous statement, but not so if you look at how the human brain works. How does the human brain works? So if you keep exposing a person to images and news and campaigns about abuses, those abuses become normalized in the human brain. And somehow the social brain normalizes them as a new standard of behavior of the group of that person. By group, meaning the group that you identify with in society. And somehow that behavior that is practiced by your group with whom you have affinity and whose actions you use as your model somehow become normal to you. And at some point, even if you're not a bad person, but it just becomes normalized to you, even subconsciously, you end up perhaps doing that act that is abusive of others' rights. This is based on a lot of theories about in-group and out-group association and behavior, but also about this new theory called simulation theory in psychology or neuroscience, where when people read words or see images about something, the way the brain processes it is by actually almost experiencing what the person is reading as if that person is there. So if I say the statement, walking in the beach, holding hands under a romantic evening, whatever, those are not just words. The way the human brain will process them is that the motor part of the neural brain will actually make that person feel as if they are literally walking. And then the sensory part of the neural brain will start smelling the breeze of the sea or feeling the sands under your feet. And then the perceptual part and the emotional part will make you feel the emotions of actually walking right at that moment on the beach. So if all we communicate about are abuses, the people who read about what we communicate will actually experience being there, most likely as the aggressor. What does that mean for the kind of behavior we want from people? There were studies done where people who are constantly exposed to hate speech, particularly in social media, end up doing hate speech themselves, even if they never thought they would, but it just becomes normal. And then at some point, that person thinks, or maybe doesn't even think, that that's what you do. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about what we're against, but we shouldn't spend all our time in talking about only what we're against. What are we for? And when we do that, we have to tell people not just about what they should not do, but also what they should do. George Lakoff is the father of framing and messaging, and he entitled one of his, if not his most popular book, Don't Think of an Elephant. If I tell you now, don't think of an elephant, what exactly are you thinking about right now? An elephant, right? So if we tell people, don't think this or don't do this, we're actually planting in their brain exactly the very idea that we don't want them to engage with. Instead, let's tell people what we want them to engage in. Raising awareness about abuses is not enough. I spent my first few years working, I was managing programs, and a big chunk of my budget was awareness raising projects because I thought we need to get the word out there. People need to know that this is happening. Yes, people need to know that this is happening. But aside from raising awareness about it, we should frame the awareness of those facts with emotions and values that people can really work with and make them act the way we want them to act. So this is an image of a wooden spoon.
Krizna, once before you go on, there's like a reaction from Ernst Jan van Wilde Gansen about, so the existence of taboo is actually not so bad on the negative side of people's behavior. I don't know if you can.
I'm not so sure I understand that, Ernst Jan. Can you elaborate a bit, please?
Yeah, the idea that popped into my mind was actually that if you don't communicate about certain negative behaviors of people, or you don't tell the stories, that actually, or at least not all these stories, and you rather underline positive behaviors, you're probably on a better way than if you, so the existence of old taboos on certain behaviors is not that bad at all, basically.
Yeah, no, so
it's a kind of social structure, taboo. I mean, let's say taboo on sexual abuse or this kind of behavior is in that sense not so bad, because it really doesn't, because of, if we don't talk about it, we do not, at least we do not create this behavior in people as a possibility.
Yeah,
we don't normalize it.
Yeah, thanks, Ernst Jan. Well, I wouldn't say that we don't talk about it at all, but it's a matter of striking that delicate balance as a strategist, as a communicator of what do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on sending images and ideas about positive social behavior and reinforcing them so people adopt that and follow that, versus constantly talking about what they should not do? And the answer is never clear. What's the formula? Is it 80% positive social behavior, 20% this? But it will depend on the context. But I guess what this is saying is that the extreme tendency on the other side is to only talk about what people should not do. I'd say to re-examine and ask ourselves, am I striking a good balance? And sometimes striking a balance means favoring for greater attention or much more attention on one than the other. And if you have to make that choice, I would say, and psychology would say, to focus more on reinforcing positive behavior than saying that this should not be done. Does that answer it, Ernst Jan?
It does, yes. But I found it interesting as a thought that, taboos might be not that bad at all.
Yeah. I guess depending on what the taboo says, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So here we have a wooden spoon. So Thomas and I have used this in workshops with different actors, and I'm interested, maybe in the chat you can type. Here's a wooden spoon. What does this conjure for you? What image, what feeling, what idea? What is a wooden spoon to you? Can you kindly type that in the chat? Mother's cooking. So we have mother's cooking, nice food, salad, cooking and food, warm food. Cool. Yeah, cooking. Wow, a lot of cooking and searing and salad and food here. That's interesting because whenever we show this image, no plastic, GG, I'm for that. Whenever we show this image to different people, we get as many answers as the types of people in the room. Yeah, can I call you Katya from Concord? So some people, Katya here says something that is used for kids in trouble. Some people, when you show this wooden spoon, would come up with exactly what many in the chat said. Oh, it reminds me of the time when my grandmother was cooking this delicious dish when I was a kid. Or some people would say, oh, it reminds me of healthy eating like salad. But for some people, including myself, the first time I saw this, I remembered being spanked by my father with a wooden spoon in my butt, on my butt, because that's my life experience with a wooden spoon. The thing with awareness raising is, it's like us throwing wooden spoons out there and expecting that everyone would process the wooden spoon the way we would process it, and that they would then act based on that wooden spoon the way we want them to act. But then people are not empty vessels. We come with our own upbringing, cultural, gender, racial, and all other sorts of biases that give wooden spoons millions and billions of meanings as there are human beings. So the job that we have is to not just throw out wooden spoons out there. Our job is to wrap the wooden spoon, paint it a certain way, put it in a certain setting so that people can be guided in how to process the wooden spoon. So they wouldn't think about being spanked in the butt. By the way, I had a very beautiful childhood. I just want to clarify that. But I did get spanked with a wooden spoon. But instead, conjure the kind of feeling, emotions, and actions that we want. And so images like this, very like when I started in human rights, you see this, and people who work against death penalty, they put that out and they think people should know what to do with this. They should be against death penalty. But no, we need to frame. And when we frame, we need to know what kinds or what parts of the brain we're actually triggering. Because as much as we think that people are rational, that we use facts, we know by now, as with many elections that we've seen and many other decisions such as Brexit and the peace accords in Colombia have shown, we don't make the most important life decisions, not election, not marriage, on the basis of facts or rationality. We use emotions and values that we hold dear. So as in any narrative work, we need to know what values we're actually triggering, what emotions we want to bring about, because those are the emotions that will make our audience act. And you can see the play in the use of values and being much more smart about values and emotions in a number of different campaigns and causes around the world. For example, this shift or this tidal wave of the legalization of abortion or even same-sex marriage. What before it was pro-life, pro-choice, but then it has become more of, it is about compassion. It is about love for the women in your life, for your mother, your sister, a kind of approach that brings it closer to home for everyone, regardless of their political alignment, etc. So instead of it being about a medical issue or even a rights issue, it has become an issue that triggers people's values and emotions. And we see this also in politics. For those of you who may be familiar with politics in Turkey, in 2019, there was mayoral elections in Istanbul, which really in the Turkish political landscape, being mayor of Istanbul is a very important political position. We know that Turkey has been led by Erdogan of the Justice and Development Party, or AKP, very divisive and really trying to bring back a pro-Islamist kind of society, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into detail, but there was an election for mayor of Istanbul, and this guy, Ekrem İmamoğlu, ran for mayor. And he ran using a very simple narrative, and that is the narrative of radical love. They even came up, his head of campaigns came up with a book that was distributed to their campaigners. It's called the Book of Radical Love. And the instructions to their campaigners who were knocking on doors was simple. Ignore Erdogan. Don't talk about him. Don't talk about all the issues that divide Istanbulites between this or that. Ignore Erdogan and love those who support Erdogan. And try to appeal to the emotions and values of people, regardless of what part of the political spectrum they're in. Because at the end of the day, people care about the same thing. They care about love, their family, food on the table, the things that bind us as a community. Let's not give further airtime to the voice of Erdogan by even if we try to oppose him. Instead, set it aside and talk about what Istanbul could be if we focus on love. His slogan was, everything's going to be all right. He won twice because Erdogan, well, the court nullified the first election, so he had to run again, and he won by an even greater margin by the second election. So radical love. And it says, he said, find a neighbor who doesn't think like you and just give him a hug. What can this mean for our highly polarized societies on very different issues, whether it's about vaccination, whether it's about populists, whether it's about anything? When you have a highly polarized situation, how do you rise above the polarization instead of further increasing that polarization? Instead of focusing always on what you're against and who you're against, can you talk about what you are for? And maybe you'll find that those people who are opposed to you actually may want the same thing, or maybe they don't. But at least you shore up the base for those who are for what you want in the world. And aside from our values, we know that there's some key human needs. And one of them, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, every human being needs a sense of belonging, whether to someone, to something, or to a group. And you will see that at play in this video that I will show next to you from the Marriage Equality Campaign in Ireland. And this is about using the importance of belonging to a family, which is super, super important in Ireland. Here's our next film.
Nothing more to hear you knocking at my door. 'Cause if I could see your face once more,
will you come with me?
I could die a happy man.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Mom, come on, it's time.
Can't get him. Maybe he's not coming.
Like a lift to the polling station.
Is there room for Auntie Patsy?
I go on.
Was made for movie screens. But if you loved me, why'd you leave me? Take
Dad.
my body, take my body.
Did you vote?
Of course I voted. I'll see you later on.
By voting yes on May 22nd, we can change forever what it means to grow up LGBT in Ireland. Ask your family to come on this journey with us.
Ask your family to come on this journey with us. It really strikes to the heart of what they know that the target audience they have care most in the world. it's family. And we know that when the people and the group we care about model a certain kind of behavior or even view, we are more likely to have that behavior or that view. So here is a confusing image that I will just leave you with. It's perhaps for those of us who are not already engaging with this, but this is a map of the different values that they've mapped across different cultures. Basically, these are the values that they find people hold and that triggers their decisions or their behavior, from extrinsic values or values that have to do with power, wealth, influence, to intrinsic values about benevolence and generosity and kindness. And knowing how the different values connect with one another so that when you trigger one value, you actually negate another, etc., etc. This is to say that as communicators and as strategists, it's important to know what value am I triggering with my strategy and with my communications, and let that value or set of values be the soul or the guiding, the compass that determines my communications or narrative strategy. So if we're not yet thinking about values and just posting posts on social media here and there, then we're missing something, because we know, remember the wooden spoon, we need to wrap the wooden spoon with values and emotions. Third shift, very much related to the second one, which is to talk about only the problem to actually articulating the way out of the problem or the solution. I remember when I was starting in human rights work, my model of a good human rights report was the reports of these big international organizations where you have, if it's a 200-page report, God forbid people read 200-page reports, but they would spend 193 pages on what the problem is. The abuses, exposing the abuses and the investigation and the facts. Perfect. And then they spend the last 7 pages on the recommendations and what needs to be done. To the European Union, to the government of this, to civil society, to this, and that, this is what you should do. That's the traditional model of a human rights or even a development work report. We focus so much on what the problem is, and we don't leave enough space for people to actually think more and very concretely about where they can come in and what the solution out of the problem could be. And the difficulty with this is, I will explain it using the Overton window. So the Overton window basically captures how ideas in society, especially progressive ideas, become adopted as policy. So if you're going to look at the extreme ends of the spectrum, you see the words unthinkable. So imagine in the Philippines. The Philippines is the only country in the world that does not have divorce. Malta used to be part of our club, but now Malta is also divorcing. So the Philippines is the only country in the world today without divorce. We have annulment, but no divorce. So to propose divorce in the Philippines today or in the last few decades is just unthinkable. The same way that talking about legalizing abortion in Colombia years ago would have been unthinkable. But then the way thoughts about these evolve in society is that if you keep repeating an idea over and over, it moves from being unthinkable to maybe radical, but not unthinkable. And then if you keep repeating and repeating, it moves to something that is actually maybe acceptable. You haven't fully convinced people yet, but it's no longer preposterous as an idea. And then if you keep repeating and repeating your message, it moves down the spectrum to becoming sensible until it becomes popular over time. And then it arrives at the holy grail of a lot of social change work, which is it becomes enshrined as policy, which means when we're working on social change, we cannot just talk about the problem. We need to articulate the solution and keep repeating it, and repeating it until it just becomes common sense. We know that legislators and government officials don't enshrine something into law or policy because it's the right thing to do. They enshrine it as policy because it is what is considered as common sense in their communities or in their countries. So we need to make common sense, not the problem, not the abuses, but the solutions that we want. So what is the solution to the problem that you have? And I'll show you another video that I always like showing. It's by the Yes Men in the United States. They've been around since the 90s. They started as a group of 2 men, and now they're a bigger group, and they actually have women, so they're due for rebranding. But they call themselves culture jammers, who use mockery, trickery, comedy, all sorts of scandalous but fun things to attack at the heart of very important and even polarizing social change issues, from gun rights to whatever. And in this video, they came up with a stunt where they, well, I won't explain much, but here is your New York Times edition of what the future could be, the solutions that we can have instead of just the problems.
We needed a really ambitious plan, because all we ever read in the newspapers was how we needed to put everything back on track, back to how it was before it fell apart. But how it was the problem. We needed to show what real change could look like. So together with a whole lot of friends, we would blanket Manhattan with 100,000 copies of our very own newspaper. We'd call it the New York Times. Except our New York Times would be a little bit different. Ours would be set 6 months in the future. It would show what could happen if we set our imagination free.
Things have gotten pretty bad, and I think it's hard for people to imagine the world working another way. So we're trying to, as realistically as possible, present this world as it could be.
They just brought out the proof of the New York Times, and it looks unfucking believable. Really good.
The obvious question, how the heck did you do it? Andy, you want to start? How long were you working on this thing, and how many of you?
Well, there were a lot of us. It wasn't just the Yes Men, it was a large group of people. We were just one of many groups. It was an idea that sparked a lot of people's imaginations. They wanted to see this happen. And that's sort of the message of the paper as well, is that, great, we elected Obama, and that's fantastic, but now the real work begins.
The idea was to put out something that was optimistic, that says, we can do all these things. Why not? We created the system that we have now, so why not create a good one instead?
Wow. Very good. Here, let me tie you up. This is the big day. 7 a.m. rush hour. This is the time to get the papers out there.
Three times. Special issue. Special issue.
Free New York Times. Special edition of the New York Times. Free New York Times. Is this real?
It's fake, right?
Who publishes this? Can I grab another one, please? What?
National Health Insurance Act passes.
The Patriot Act repealed.
Maximum wage law succeeds. Good luck with that one.
This is too good to be true, but it's not impossible.
It's a dream newspaper, right? It's like you wake up and all the things that you wanted became the news.
The war's over!
Our fake news was a hit. But would the real news pick it up?
You don't work for the New York Times. Who is it that you work for handing this out?
A guy named John Smith?
who?
Yeah, John Smith.
John Smith.
It's a New York Times special edition. Is there anything wrong with it? I mean...
Well, yeah, it's not the New York Times.
Extra, extra, read all about it. The New York Times declares the war in Iraq is over.
Some commuters got their hands on what looks like a special edition of the New York Times. As you might have guessed, though, it's a fake.
Eine New York Times in die Hand gedrückt bekamen, trauten jedenfalls ihren Augen nicht.
Джордж Буш отдан под суд, а Кондолиза Райс приносит официальные извинения за недостоверную.
We printed a paper with the headlines that we'd like to see. So if these are the headlines that people were so excited to read this morning, let's make them happen.
I think we have to exercise some muscles we either don't have or that have atrophied or something. A civic muscle, a thrifty muscle, a generous muscle.
We've got to take back our government. March into City Hall and
one of the women who spoke last talked about exercising the muscle. Remember what I told you about seeing words and the brain simulating as if that person is in that situation? So if we keep talking about the solutions and the vision of the world that we have and make it so vivid as to read it in a newspaper, people will simulate those images, those situations, and think that that's normal, that that's what they should have, which means our narratives cannot just be about the problem. They have to talk about the solution, and we need to normalize the solution. The fourth shift is talking about threat, or seeing a problem or a situation and focusing on the angle of the threat to the angle of the opportunity. And one of the issues where you can see this very clearly playing out is on the issue of refugees or migration. And we see this live at the moment, and this has been going on for years with people fleeing their countries because of war and economic despair. And this is a typical image that you'd see about Syrian refugees crossing into Europe and refugees from all parts, different parts of Middle East and North Africa, and now Ukraine crossing, and you see images of people in despair, suffering, right? And again, I'm not saying that we should never use these images, but the question to you as a strategist and as a communicator is, before you just put that out there because that's what you normally put or that's what everyone else puts, ask yourself, what is your end goal? What kind of behavior are you hoping to get from your audience? If the behavior that you want from your audience is, for example, right now, for your community to start signing up their couches and their extra rooms for refugees from Ukraine, maybe in addition to, or instead of showing them these images of despair, show them the image of what your community could be and the opportunity for greater vibrance and energy and love if you welcome people instead of shut them out through a wall or a closed door. How can you imagine those refugees who become parents of your child's classmate in grade school when they become productive members of your community? So focusing not just on their situation now as suffering refugees to the situation that they could be and the role that they could play in your community if given the chance to start over. So again, it's a strategic choice, but the importance is to think harder about the choices that we make, from only focusing on the threat and the problem to the opportunity. So another way to show this is one of my favorite videos. Again, a video, I told you it's a film showing festival from Denmark. And this isn't even from a social change entity, but from a TV station. It's entitled All That We Share. And just take note of the subtitles and the whole thing that's going on. This is an actual live experiment that was recorded on video.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
So instead of reinforcing the boxes and the categories that we see in our society today, can we shift our narrative strategy so that the boxes can maybe be peeled away little by little and we can see what binds people together? Here, supposedly what binds people together is their love for Denmark, or the fact that they had sex the past week, or the fact that they're lonely. But to peel the layers of the boxes that are most predominant and uncover what binds people together and the opportunity that comes with doing that. Final shift. And the final shift is from painting, especially those who are suffering abuses or are in situations of poverty or discrimination or unequal treatment as victims, to highlighting the heroism that they have. I will show 2 videos to show the nuance of this, because it's easy to see this shift as now, oh, everyone's a hero, but that's not exactly it. So I'll show the first video. It's from India, and you'll need to watch closely about how the story evolves and how the revelation of the person becomes. And then I'll talk a bit more about it afterwards. It's from Vicks. I grew up with Vicks, especially when I had cold. So this is from the business or commercial world.
मम्मी नाराज तो होने ही वाली। वो तो चाहती कि मैं डॉक्टर ही बनूं। इसने हॉलीडेज खत्म और बोर्डिंग स्कूल शुरू। एक दिन भी एक्स्ट्रा रुकने नहीं दिया। मम्मी भी ना। मम्मी ने अपनी लाइफ अपने आप ही बनाई। 18 साल की थी जब उनके फादर ने उन्हें घर से निकाल दिया। अकेले रहने का तो सोचने से भी डर लगता है। मैंने अपने पापा को कभी देखा नहीं, और मेरी असली माँ वो बहुत बीमार रहती थी। उनके बारे में सिर्फ एक ही दिन याद है जो मैं कभी भुला नहीं पाती। एक दिन कुछ लोग आए और उन्हें एम्बुलेंस में ले गए। फिर वो कभी वापस ही नहीं आई। फिर एक दिन मम्मी आई। बहुत प्यार से मुझे अपनी गोद में बिठाया और मुझे अपने घर ले गई। तबीयत खराब थी तो पूरी रात मेरे साथ बैठी रही। सुबह मम्मी ने एक सुंदर सी रेड फ्रॉक पहनाई, मेरे लिए ढेर सारे चिप्स बनाए। मम्मी के साथ 10 साल हो गए। अब तो मम्मी मम्मी कम और दोस्त ज़्यादा बन गई। संडे हम दोनों का फेवरेट दिन है। बालों में तेल लगाने के बाद दोपहर में मेरा फेवरेट लंच कड़ी चावल और रात में हॉरर फिल्म। डर लगता है पर मम्मी होती है ना तो नहीं लगता। ये है मेरी मम्मी, है ना प्यारी? मम्मी ने लाइफ में इतने प्रॉब्लम्स देखे, कितना कुछ सहा है, पर फिर भी उन्होंने हमेशा मेरा ख्याल रखा है। सिविक्स बुक में तो लिखा है कि सबके लिए बेसिक राइट सेम होते हैं, फिर मम्मी को क्यों नहीं है? इसलिए मैं डॉक्टर नहीं लॉयर बनूंगी मेरी मम्मी के लिए।
Hope-based communications is not about putting up another human rights award. It isn't about painting with the same stereotype from victims to now everyone's a hero and it's a superhero and all of that. What it really means at the core of it is for groups and people who are dehumanized because of different reasons, they're refugees, they're people with certain gender choices in life or different situations that they have, is to rehumanize them so people can see that at the end of the day, they're like us, their mothers, their siblings, their parents, their children, with the same life concerns and motivations and aspirations for the people they love and for themselves as us. So it's a matter of being able to get people to peel away the layers of labels of refugees, this or that, to be able to see each other, look each other in the eye, and see beyond the surface. And that is what this shift is about. And I will demonstrate that. I think this is the final video I will show about the power of looking people in the eye. This is one of the most successful videos by Amnesty. And this has to do with the issue of refugees in Europe. And I won't say much beyond that. This is the Dutch subtitles. I think I need to change it to the English one. If you can give me a second, let me do this. By the way, if you do have questions at the moment, I know I've just been firing at you constantly, but let me look up the English subtitles. Okay. Okay, I've got it. I'll share now. I will share the links to the videos. And in fact, what I will do after is to share with Partos so they can share with you afterwards a playlist of videos that are amazing using hope-based comms that Thomas put together. So they can serve as inspiration for you in different contexts. You're welcome. Let me do this. Yeah, there.
Have a nice mustache. One, two, three, four, five, six, five. Sechs, fünf.
Are you new in Berlin?
Yeah, 8 months.
And are you alone here or with your family?
No, I don't. This life, sometime nice, sometime not good.
Beatrice. Oh my god, I'm keeping my eyes on you. Wow. Hello. I expect you to ask my number. Be a strong man.
Thank you so much.
We will go to the zoo, maybe this few days.
Oh, that's so
Text you if you would like to.
I would love it. Of course. You can do it.
When I was looking into her eyes, I was trying to see what I could tell from the life that she lived, and I think I could tell that there was a lot of experience lived there.
It doesn't matter, look at the eyes or something, just give yourself a chance to talk and to look at the other person.
So that's shifting from victim to hero, meaning everyone's a hero. We are all heroes of our own lives, of our own context. Can we get people to look beyond the boxes and the categories to understand and look into the lives that others have lived and perhaps find greater empathy for them? So I will now go. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to spend just the next 5 minutes to land the helicopter. I threw a lot of things at you in the last more than an hour. And I'd like to ask you to just take the next 5 or so minutes to think of a particular issue you're working on, or perhaps if you're more of a strategist or you work with different actors or clients, choose a particular um, idea or message that you want to convey, a narrative that you want to convey, and think about how you're currently talking about it now to how you would want to portray it, or how you would want to shift or make the changes based on one or some or all of the shifts that I shared. And to concretely do that, I would love to have you do an Instagram post. So Gigi will be sharing a link to a PowerPoint file that you can open, and if you can download and edit that slide and put in an actual image that you would now choose if you were to post an Instagram post about your issue. And then come up with a caption, 5 words or around 5 words that goes with that image. And as you do that, try and ask the question. It's here in the slide. What is the picture you want people to get in their minds when they hear the words blank? And those words are having to do with a particular issue or a campaign or organizational vision that you want to convey. And remember, try to make it an action picture. So instead of a logo or something, show someone or some people doing something to encourage people to perhaps simulate that action. What would a story look like where your target audience carried out an activity that acted upon the values and worldview that you identified, not in the previous exercise, we didn't get to do the previous exercise, but the values that you think is the spirit behind your work? It should be an image of real people and an image that people would actually repost on Instagram, depending on your target audience. And then as you do that, ask yourself, who actually is my target audience? And what are the values that I want to convey? So Gigi has already put the link in the chat. Please go there and let's just spend the next 5 minutes with you working on the PowerPoint slide. Thank you. And for anyone who has some questions in the meantime, please feel free to type them in the chat. So I know many of you are still working on this, but if someone already has something and would want to share what they've come up with, it will be great if you can share it with us. You can actually hit the share screen button. Anyone can share. But if you can raise your hand, I'll call on you and you can share the screen so we can see what you've come up with. Unless you've used the 5 minutes to cook your dinner, and I would completely understand. Also, any questions or comments, ideas, reactions from anyone at this point? I've only seen names and not faces, so I really wouldn't know how you're reacting to all of this. By the way, if it's not too much to ask, if you can turn on your video so I can see the human beings I've been speaking to, I'll be super grateful. But I'd understand if you're doing laundry and can't do that. Hi, Ernst Jan. Good to see you. Hi, everyone. Oh, faces, people, human beings. Hello. Oh, there are people in the room.
Yeah, Krizna, I was wondering. Sometimes I get the reaction like, yeah, but this whole base is quite a bit naive or something. Like the more cynical thinkers, like if you see the world so many problems and then you come with a message of hope. Are people waiting for it? Let's say. What's your reaction to it?
Well, actually, the reason why I got hooked into this whole hope-based comms thing is that the very reason is because it's smart. Hope-based comms is not something that came out of the blue from nothing. It came and it is coming from a lot of research and science. And the core message of hope-based comms is that we should be more deliberate about the choices that we make in the narratives and in the day-to-day images and words that we choose. And if you're really going to use neuroscience and psychology, you will necessarily end up with the kinds of narratives that hope-based comms is trying to promote. So it isn't naive, it's actually smart. But again, I understand the comments about its naivete from the impression that hope-based comms is only about happy images and making people feel good about themselves. And like what I said, it isn't about that. Sometimes they will feel a certain kind of sadness. They will go through a journey of different emotions. But the goal is that at the end of the journey, people should not feel a sense of despair. They should feel a sense of something can be done out of this, and I have a concrete roadmap to helping make that change, whether big or small steps. Yes, but it's impossible when the whole page is blocked, a problem I won't have on home laptop.
Yeah, there's some
chat message.
With the template, I think.
Yeah. Anyone else? So
yeah, I think it's also there are like 4 minutes, so maybe because I'm also curious, yeah, are there lessons learned or things that really are useful for you? And then I mean to the participants, I'm like curious if there's something.
We have a message in the chat, a really important one about budget limitations. So you often have the difficulty to keep repeating a message. How can we make the most within that limitation? Also, is this as effective for reaching out to political actors, policymakers, experts? Excellent questions. The one on budget. We know, especially if you're a communicator, that really good communications is based on having tested your message, having done audience testing and audience listening, etc. And that can be expensive. But in fact, there are cheap or very low cost ways to do that using very different platforms on social media or existing research. I guess the push is not necessarily to increase your budget from this to that, but it's about making the choice to actually take time to do this, whether it's low cost or high cost, to not doing it at all. because there's limited budget. And being able to repeat the message doesn't mean that you pull out an ad that costs millions of euros on some billboard in the Netherlands. It means being deliberate, not just amongst your communications team, but amongst the entire staff. Because if someone who's a program officer in your organization gets interviewed and goes off message and says the wrong word, evokes the wrong image, then your whole message is off. The repetition dies. It means being a communicator, and this is actually how I will end, is not just coming at the end of a campaign or where the research has been done, they bring in the comms team, can you please make that flourish, put out the stories and the press releases and the launch event, and then you as a communicator is left to have to come up with the message. The message should be repeated not just in terms of frequency, but in terms of who speaks it at all different levels and all different spaces. And then the question of whether it's as effective with political actors, policymakers, experts, there are, as you can imagine, different gradients to it. You cannot be showing some of these videos to a European Commission policy maker in a suit and say, look at this video. We know as really sophisticated communicators that there is sophistication to this. But what kind of sophistication are we using? Did we do our research in understanding what values speak to these experts? Because even if they're experts, they're still human beings. They're still wired in a very similar way just because they have a human brain and very human emotions or way of dealing with emotions. So it does work, but it reinforces the need to really understand our audience and to use the words and the images and the approach the best way that works for them. I worked with a group that was trying to raise the issue of the connection between closing civil society space and securitization, super technical thing, and they work with EU diplomats. And this was a big question for them. How do I use hope-based comms with experts? You can use it, but then you have to do the legwork of understanding your audience. I will end with something, and I know we are at war, and a lot of people are thinking a lot about it. So I would like to address the big elephant in the room and end with a quote from an article by Yuval Harari in The Guardian from a couple of days ago. I'm not Yuval Harari's publicist. I don't know why I'm quoting him so much today, but the article is entitled, "Why Putin Has Already Lost the War." I urge you, if you haven't read it, to Google it. It's in The Guardian, "Why Putin Has Already Lost the War" by Yuval Harari. And here is his one of the paragraphs in his article. He said that nations are ultimately built on stories. Each passing day adds more stories that Ukrainians will tell, not only in the dark days ahead, but in the decades and generations to come. The president who refused to flee the capital, telling the US that he needs ammunition, not a ride. The soldiers from Snake Island who told a Russian warship to go fuck yourself. The civilians who tried to stop Russian tanks by sitting in their path. This is the stuff nations are built from. In the long run, these stories count for more than tanks. Narratives and the work that you do around narratives is so critical. They build nations, they unmake nations, and they can win wars. So I hope that of all the stuff that I showed you this afternoon, it will be about really asking ourselves 2-3 more times than the usual and being more deliberate about the narratives that we put out there in the world. Is it going to be noise, or is it a path out of despair?